morning or good evening or good afternoon, everyone listening right now. Welcome to the SimplyTrade podcast. I'm your host, Anik, and I have a special guest for you today. First, I have to say that it is my favorite day, which is the 27th, my lucky number. So it'll be a great podcast, hopefully, for you, and a great day for everyone that is listening and everyone else in the world, hopefully. Hi, Cindy. Cindy Allen is on the podcast. She's a trade consultant, trade expert, I would say. How are you today?
I'm good. Although I'm a little disappointed. I don't have a favorite number, so I'm going to have to think about that.
I honestly didn't have it for a long time, and now I have to expose my age, I guess, because it was my golden birthday this year, and my birthday's on the 27th. So, and I turned 27, and then every day every 27th day, I'm like, oh, it's my lucky day. Until something bad happens, right? I'm like, oh, why is it my lucky day? But obviously, President Donald Trump was inaugurated last Monday, or this past Monday, a week from today, basically. And lots has happened. So, we're obviously talking about the trade industry today, but there's a lot that is going on right around the world, which kind of always ties into everything of trade. So it's funny because nowadays we see a lot of things. It's like, oh, finally trade is getting a seat at the table. And I don't know if that seat at the table is good or if it's bad.
Yeah. I think we're in the timeout seat at the table.
Yeah, it's like, trade, you be quiet. I'm going to do my thing. And then you jump in and you have to handle all of the things I'm currently putting in place. So I want to talk a little bit about those things that he's putting in place. First off, we've talked about this countless times, and I'm just so annoyed already by it. Sorry to be transparent, but tariffs. And it's funny because tariffs have been, from the beginning that he's talked, and people are like, whoa, tariffs. Yes, put tariffs on it. Everything. Yeah. He hasn't done it quite yet. We thought it was going to happen like day one. That didn't happen day one. So we're kind of still waiting, unsure if it'll happen or if not. He has made a statement that it might happen February 1st, or that's like the day. I guess they're kind of like reevaluating things. So tell me about what you're experiencing. Have people come to you like asking questions on this kind of topic? And what is your kind of conclusion of this, and how are you handling right now? Because clearly we still don't know, but what are you going to do once it happens? What are you going to do if he puts it in place? Or, how are we preparing for this right now?
I think there was enough lead up that a lot of companies have been looking at their supply chains anyway. We saw that originating in the pandemic, an understanding of where goods came from and where were pinch points, where there were bottlenecks, where you didn't have duplication. So I think supply chains became, a sexy topic, 5 years ago. So I think this was an evolution for folks to look at. Okay, where are my liabilities? Where do I have exposure? What's going to happen if this happens? And I think that's where I was getting a lot of calls before the inauguration, especially after the election, and a lot of talk about tariffs were, what's going to happen? So people were planning, and I don't think anyone is surprised that tariffs are going to be a part of this administration. And if you are, you haven't been paying attention to the news, especially when President Trump said his most favorite word was tariff. You have a favorite number. He has a favorite word. We all kind of saw this coming. We were all surprised, everyone in the trade that I talked to, that there wasn't an executive order or a change made on the first day. That's what he'd been saying. China, Mexico, Canada. And what we saw was a little bit of a subdued approach of, we're going to look at it for 30 days and determine what our plan of action is going to be. And I think everyone was a little bit surprised by that. We were all, kind of waiting for the executive order to come out. We were, had lined up additional resources, sometimes waiting for, the work that was to come. And so we were surprised when that didn't happen. I think what we are seeing is a little bit more focused on Canada and Mexico, which, there had been some rumblings about that, but most people saw that as a negotiating tactic to get Canada and Mexico to the table. And I think as more time has gone on, there's an understanding that that might not be the case. There might actually be tariffs that are going to be assessed against Canada and Mexico. It's not clear what the U.S. government is looking for from Canada and Mexico, other than to stop the fentanyl and to stop illegal immigration, especially on the southern border. I think we've seen some actions being taken by the government of Mexico regarding e-commerce that I believed the thought was that would subdue some of the talk of additional tariffs being assessed on Mexico. So I think we are a little bit surprised that the focus is on Canada and Mexico and not on China. China went from we're going to assess 60% tariffs. We're going to do maybe up to 100. We're going to stop everything from China. We're going to assess tariffs, like they've never been seen before. And now we're hearing, well, it might just be 10%. And we're going to look at that maybe February 1st, maybe beyond that. But we're going to talk to them. And I think everyone's a little surprised by that. We are very much prepared to deal with tariffs on China day one. And so we're all a little bit relieved that we don't have a massive amount of work in a short period of time, but we're also surprised. So we, like many of you, are waiting for the information to come out, understanding what the administration wants from these tariffs and what the goal is here. I've also heard some talk in Congress on the Hill about offsetting tax cuts with tariffs. And not all of the congressional members are behind that. Some are. Some would like to see this as a revenue generating opportunity rather than something to be used in a trade environment. And I don't think everyone's behind that, certainly, in the Senate and in the House. So we'll see where that ends up. There was a lot of talk between November and January about how to raise money. Tariffs became the number one topic of how to raise money. And that's not traditionally what tariffs are used for. Certainly in the post-World War II free trade regime, which we all agree is kind of gone. We moved from the free trade to the fair trade position of the last, 8 years. And now we're definitely in enforced trade, using it as a enforcement tool moving forward. So, we'll remain to see what will come out, but it's definitely a more measured approach than I think what we all anticipated up front.
Yeah. And, we've talked about this on the podcast before. I mean, what you said, wow. The anticipation, that is wild that, you were all anticipating it really to happen and it didn't happen. And one thing I do want to say, when you brought up China, it's so funny because I feel like there's more important things to deal with China, such as TikTok right now for him. So it seems like they want to get those social issues handled first before they get to the crazy parts, which is trade. And it's like wild that that this is even in one sentence, TikTok and trade. And, but I feel like it's all together. I know it might sound insane, but I just think they're not going to go balls to the wall immediately. Like they have certain issues they want to figure out. And obviously the TikTok president was at his inauguration, or at least he was supposed to be there. I'm not sure if he was actually there. I think I saw him though. And so I feel like that's one thing maybe that he's hoping to clear. And then also he doesn't want to be on China's bad side right now because he wants certain things from them. I don't know. I'm guessing that's what it is. And it seems like Canada and Mexico, like you said, are just being hit really hard. I mean, especially also now with the immigration situation, because he's made trade, he's kind of disregarded and told us, okay, hold off. And he's made certain standpoints on immigration, hard hit standpoints on immigration, the oil industry, electric vehicles, and green energy. So there's a lot of things that have made or where he has made changes, yet the trade industry is like, oh, hold off on that. Like, I need to figure out this first. And I'm like, I don't really know what the initiative is. Like, I'm really trying to figure out. I recently told someone, I'm like, I want him to like tell me, what is your plan? What's the end goal? I just want to know. Because right now I don't see it.
I don't think anyone knows what the end goal is. And I think they relish in that, quite frankly. They want to keep people, guessing about what their next move is. They believe that's a strong negotiating tactic. And, it's not always the most successful. I think those of us who've been in business for, 35 years, like I have been, knows that communication is key. And the more communication you have, the better you are at negotiating on both sides, because you have a mutually agreeable solution at the end. And that is definitely not a tactic that we've seen from this administration and this team of individuals. And I agree, TikTok has been, brought in together with other issues tying China in. And one of the constraints here is the ban on TikTok is actually from Congress. So it's not something that an executive order can overcome. The executive order he did issue dealt with the enforcement of the law, which is under his purview, but it can't waive it. So I think there's some balancing going on here, and some negotiation enter to the government about, okay, you have this law, we're trying to do this, it's getting in the way of doing that, and kind of a full scale view of how things are going to be impacted moving forward. And it's surprising, but also shows that there's, some on his team that are stepping back and taking a bigger picture look at what's going on instead of one single focused issue, which, again, leaves us all guessing what's going on.
So one thing he noted is that Trump has claimed that China is operating the Panama Canal and has vowed to take back control of it. I don't know if you've have any like points on this, but do you?
Well, I think, as we've seen before, talking points are one thing. The reality sometimes is something else. And I think the Panamanian government has come out very strongly indicating that they are in full control of the Panama Canal. Whether you agree with the deal that was made 100 years ago and the full sale under the Carter administration of all things, is one thing. But the Panamanian government does fully operate the Panama Canal. There are some ports that are owned by China that are near the Panama Canal, but completely separate operations. And I think that, sometimes all of that information is brought together in a way that's not exactly telling the whole truth and the whole story of what's going on. So, I really find it hard to believe that anything is going to change in the Panama Canal without a full-scale military effort, which I don't know that we're all prepared to get behind, to take over a Panama Canal that we legally sold to another government. So, it'll remain to be seen if, what comes of that. I know there's discussions about that taking place, and some in the administration are traveling to Panama, but I think,
oh my God, really?
Yeah, I think this is a big, diversion of attention, and trying to paint China in a bad light. And in this case, it's kind of unjustified because the Panamanian government is the one that's operating this. And I think it's also interesting because it does highlight how other governments and other areas of the world are starting to work together more cohesively and leaving the U.S. out. Lots of free trade agreements between other countries, lots of negotiations going on. And China has successfully gone into developing nations and invested where the U.S. has not. And so those governments have stronger relationships sometimes with China because of that investment role. And that is not always in the United States' best interest. So I understand why there is some questioning of some of those investments. I just think the Panama Canal is not one of them.
There's also a remark, I just kind of want to touch on it, the External Revenue Service, which I know I see you laughing. I've seen loads of TikTok on this, on trade experts. And, they're like, hey, have you ever heard of the IRS? Or have you, that there's such a thing? Is there anything, do you have any comment to that?
Yeah, I do have comments. All of us who do this day in and day out and pay duties to customs and work with people. And, I worked at customs. So it's like, wait a minute, I know what their trade function is. Their trade function, the Customs Service was the second agency that was actually established in the United States. Before the Internal Revenue Service, and it was the first collector of duties and taxes. So it has a 200 plus broad history of collecting duties and taxes. So I think all of us were a little taken aback by, the fact that another agency is going to collect this information. But I think it stems from, this is just me guessing. I think it stems from the belief of some that external companies, external governments pay tariffs and taxes to the United States when the goods are imported. Us trade geeks know that's not true. The U.S. importer pays the import duties and is obligated to pay that to the United States. And there are rules about who can do that. Yes, you have a foreign importer of record. However, they must have bonds. They must have, measures put in place and be registered with the United States government and specifically with Customs and Border Protection, CBP. So I think it stemmed from a misunderstanding that, we're going to be able to collect foreign tariffs and foreign taxes directly from these external groups. And I think that played to his base a lot, who, yay, we're going to go collect, duties and taxes from foreign governments. But there's also international treaties and laws that prevent the United States or any one sovereign nation from collecting foreign taxes on foreign soil. There were court cases around this in the 80s and 90s that struck that practice down. So I think this is something that garnered a lot of headlines and, was it to play to a political base that we're going to get the foreign guys and make them pay instead of our own citizens. But really what we do know is tariffs and taxes that are collected on the importation really trickle down to the consumer. The consumer is the one paying. I don't care who pays the tariff. We, as consumers, end up paying more for those goods because they're incorporated into the cost of those goods.
Ultimately, this is not just for trade people. This is also for consumers and to understand what's really happening. And truly, I want to say that if Trump may listen to this podcast, he may say that the External Revenue Service doesn't make any sense. But, that's why I'm confused.
I also think that as trade individuals, we have an opportunity here. So yes, you can pay attention to, this is political, somebody already does that. This is ridiculous. But, I always try to look at, okay, why is this a thing? Why is this a thing? Other than the political aspect of, playing to a base, why is this a thing? And is there an opportunity for us? So one of the things that we've seen since 9/11, since DHS was actually even developed and implemented, was a slow focus on immigration. And now any given commissioner of CBP is spending 90% of their time on immigration issues. So what happens to trade? We get that 10% left over. And before DHS and before CBP was formed, there were two separate agencies that dealt with immigration. CBP handled immigration only at the border. That was it. And the Immigration Service dealt with all of the immigration issues, and they worked with CBP to actually, handle the people coming over the border. That was all they did, and then they turned it over to the Immigration Service. So very much separated. 9/11 brought that together in CBP. You had the Border Patrol agents that were part of Immigration and Naturalization Services that were merged, and we called them the green shirts, which was Border Patrol, and the blue shirts, which was the traditional Customs Service, were brought together under one CBP. And we've seen the traditional blue shirt guys, the traditional, trade, lawful passenger traffic, coming in, get less attention. So for me, one of the conversations that I've been a part of over the past 10 years or so, and in a lot of different settings, congressionally, in the industry, in associations, is there an opportunity to separate the traditional trade function from the immigration function and have that focus be purely back on trade? Now, they're always going to be linked. I understand that because you are part of the border. And I understand there's an interconnectivity there for intelligence and actions and things like that. However, CBP is also connected to TSA. And the TSA is part of DHS, but it doesn't have to be part of CBP. So is there an opportunity here for us to say we need a purely focused trade agency again, whether that's separate from DHS or part of DHS or whatever they want to put it, but do we have an opportunity to have a bigger focus? So we aren't competing for the immigration dollars. We aren't competing for the immigration focus. We aren't competing for that, that type of trade coming forward. So I asked that when I heard this. Is this an opportunity for us? And I think a lot of people are starting to think, maybe there is. Some are opposed, some are for, but it's worthy of discussion.
I do want to touch on one more thing, which is I believe it's to tighten the de minimis duty exemption, right? Okay, correct. Then I'm on the right side. So tighten the de minimis duty exemption for low value shipments. Can you explain this just a little bit, and then go into what that means for any businesses?
Yeah, so de minimis is the mechanism that allows goods to come in under $800 free of duty. It also has a simplified release process. So major cargo, you have kind of two steps. You have the, hey, Customs, will you release these goods? Here's some information. And then on a normal shipment, that's followed up with additional information. Here's the tariff number. Here's the duty that we expect to pay. Here's the buyer, seller, some additional information about the transaction itself. So de minimis just has that release request. Hey, Customs, here's the good, here's the value, here's the country of origin, here's what's coming from, here's where it's going to. Will you release us under the de minimis provision? And that went in the TIFTIA Act from $200 to $800. A lot of people point to that happening as being the reason why de minimis has gone from a couple of 100,000 shipments a year to over 1.3 billion shipments a year, which is a massive amount of growth. However, last year, CBP, when they pulled their stats, said the average de minimis shipment value is $25. So it has nothing to do with the value.
Does this have to do with, like, I don't know, it's because I feel like I've seen something about this, but I've seen like Timo and Shein, because I think they use the de minimis, right? Because they benefit from it, like, really, and like a lot. And, there's obviously forced labor allegations and whatnot, so they're like pissed over here. But does that have anything to do with it?
So I think, yes, because it's e-commerce. E-commerce is really what drove de minimis shipments from coming up. And this little phone, which is really a computer, with millions of catalogs of goods that we carry around in our pocket, and when we're bored, shop online. That really is what drove the e-commerce from exploding. Now, would it have exploded if e-commerce could not take advantage of de minimis? I would argue yes, probably. So I don't think that de minimis is something bad. And I worked for two express companies. So, my livelihood depended on a lot on e-commerce being successful. I'm also a huge, online shopper. I very rarely go to a store anymore. I order everything online because it's just easier to have it brought to my house, or I go pick it up at the store or whatever. And I think most Americans are like that. We like goods that are easily accessible to us, and we have been given that opportunity to have that. De minimis is a piece of that has made that successful. Temu, Shein, and even Amazon and some of the other, up and coming marketplace apps have incorporated the de minimis into their process. But really, what are they selling? They aren't selling a clearance process. That's not why I decide to buy that $5 shirt on Temu. It's not. I don't care. And if it's $5, I'm gonna buy it. So what the issue is when in 2018, when the former Trump administration actually rolled out additional duties on China in the form of 301 duties, which were 7.5, 25, up to 100% additional duty. De minimis was accepted from that. So that had a spurring effect on additional e-commerce shipments being delivered to the consumer. So the delivery to the consumer is actually another important part. I don't want it delivered to a distribution center and have to go to a store to pick it up. I want it delivered directly to my residents. That was happening before e-commerce became a huge issue. You would order, and I've told this story before on the SimplyTrade podcast, where, I grew up and my relatives lived in rural areas in Indiana and Ohio, and you didn't have a big store. So what did you do? You went to the JCPenney or the Sears catalog store and you ordered what you wanted, and it came to that catalog store. And you would go pick it up. And that's because they didn't have package delivery then. It was very rare to have a package delivered, and it was very expensive. So with the invention of the express industry, with the invention of air travel, carrying all these packages becoming more and more cheap and affordable, people took advantage of that. So in one way, it's just an evolution of shopping that's been electronic and allowed the consumer to get the goods directly. And it was facilitated by de minimis. So there are two NPRMs, a notice of proposed rulemaking on de minimis. One is to revoke that 301 exemption. So if you have a good from China that is subject to 301 duties, you now cannot, or under this NPRM, you couldn't claim de minimis on that. So you're going to have to pay duty. The other is to require some additional information on the packages themselves. That is for a security concern. CBP has said that there is an enhanced ability for transnational criminal organizations to infiltrate into de minimis packages. And because there are so many of them, CBP is challenged with identifying, goods that are in violation of U.S. law or harmful to the U.S. population. So I think that request requires a package to be photographed or x-rayed or additional information given to CBP so that they can screen that good. That's a huge challenge for most shippers to provide that information. Also, where you bought it. So if I order a package and I order it from, wherever, and it comes to my house, the company that ships it now has to provide the URL of the website that I actually ordered it on. So linking that is going to be a huge challenge. So that's one NPRM. The other NPRM, revoking the 301 exemption, also requires everything to have a classification, so an HTS number. Right now, that's not the case. Not every classification, not every shipment for de minimis requires a classification. So that's going to be an additional cost for those goods. So I wrote a four series article on this on LinkedIn. If you go to my LinkedIn page, yeah, there's a four article. What started as a series of three articles became four when these NPRMs came out. But I talk about what's going to happen. But I really think what will happen is things will just get more expensive, because I think that people underestimate the desire of consumers to get goods delivered to their house. And if I ordered that $4 shirt and I have to now pay $6 or $6.50, is that going to prevent me from buying that? Probably not. Probably not. And the shipping, instead of coming directly to me, it will go to a distribution center where they will then hand it off to a domestic type of industry. The challenge here is going to be those packages are probably going to be still packaged individually, and they're going to be in a big box, and it's going to go to a distribution center, and it's going to get unpackaged. And this one's going to go to UPS and that FedEx and that postal service and that, a local delivery. But CBP is going to still have the same challenges. The sale of that good will probably take place after it arrives in the US, which means the sale will take place between big box retailer to big box retailer in the US. And then they will charge my card at that point. So the sale will happen in the US, which becomes a domestic transaction. So Customs isn't going to get my information. They aren't going to know that I ordered that. It's going to be from, Temu to Temu or Shein to Shein, and Shein in the US. So, but when they open that box, it's still going to be 4,000 individual packages of a shirt. The customs entry will say, 4,000 shirts. They'll pay duty on that, but they're going to miss out on getting the individual information from me, which I think is extremely valuable for CBP for targeting purposes, because they can see more information and more patterns on how that actually is being, shipped and delivered. So I think there's some challenges here with the implementation of this. Is there a benefit? Maybe a little bit, but for security, maybe getting that picture, maybe getting the URL will be more beneficial for CBP, but not getting me as an individual consumer or the 4,000 other individual consumers that bought that shirt gives CBP less information about the parties to the transaction. They'll get a little bit more about the package and less about the parties to the transaction. So there's going to be a balance.
Yeah, you highlighted two things too that stuck out to me that we've been talking about throughout this podcast. And one that you said that CBP, is kind of in the back. I mean, for trade, they're kind of in the background. They don't have, they're kind of behind in that sense. Like they don't have the ability to take care of all the stuff in trade or like secure trade properly because they have to deal with immigration, blah, 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 blah. And one thing you noted again is that they're behind on the de minimis because there's so many shipment and they can't secure it properly. So one thing that you noted before is, to have an agency or whatever to be able to track these things and secure our shipments. So it's funny that you made that statement. And secondly, we'll get back to prices, tariffs, increased prices for consumers. Now we're going here, people are shopping on Shein, people are shopping on Temu, or whatever possible shipment that comes in, from other countries. The prices are going to increase. So how are we even decreasing prices at all? Like I don't see that right now. One in any sense, I don't see it. So for the people that are really hoping for it and voted for it, and that's what they want, I really hope they get it. But I just, from all the facts that are presented to us right now, I just don't see it, and I feel bad because it doesn't seem to happen in the near future. It even seems the opposite is going to happen. Really hope that is going to turn around. And I just don't know how, but, so it's really interesting that you brought up, these de minimis points and I mean, just anything that you said in the past 30 minutes has been incredible. Just so much information to gather and to take in. And I hope our listeners have really enjoyed this. I know there's a lot of information already out there and talks about tariffs and whatnot, but you've definitely said things that that are different and people should think on a little bit, or maybe spark conversations. And I hope it does it for you, our listeners. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't have any more questions. I could ask a million questions as to the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, Canada being the 51st state. I feel like those are just, I just can't get myself to ask those questions anymore. So we're going to leave that behind. But
yeah, I focus on trade, not renaming, Gulfs and, possible acquisitions of other countries and or country resources. So
yeah, no,
my lane is trade.
Your lane is trade. Yeah, trade. And it's all trade. I mean, that's exactly what we're here to do. Those are just floating things that are floating in my brain all the time. And anyways, that really is it. I have no further questions. I want to thank you so much for coming on. I know you've been on a couple of times now. We call you behind the scenes. We call you the Taylor Swift of trade.
I'm a huge Swiftie. I will tell you, that's a huge compliment to me.
Yeah,
I love her and admire her as a businesswoman. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
have this much of her talent and business acumen, I'd be doing good.
Okay, well, we do. Yeah, we call it, I'm being serious. We do. We always say that, we're going to get the Taylor Swift of trade.
That was hilarious.
I know. And I'm a huge Swiftie. So that is definitely a compliment. But thank you so much. And this episode is out, January 27th. So thank you for listening. We appreciate you so much. If you have any comments, concerns, questions, please regard them to us. And also, if you have questions for Cindy, you can let us know and we can forward that to her. Also, we will link your article of the de minimis down below, just so people can check on that and see and read some further notes on it. That's really it. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much for joining us. SimplyTrade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest in the show or would like to sponsor SimplyTrade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at SimplyTradePod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading.